Okay, so we're going to discuss some of the vocabulary used in the stations that we're working on. The first words we're going to cover are niche and habitat. You'll hear it pronounced niche and niche. Either way is right. So when you think of habitat, you usually think of my cute little foxes over here. They are living in a burrow. So habitat is where an organism lives. Now, niche covers the role an organism plays. For instance, this fox over here is controlling the population of the rats by consuming the rats. So that's the first area of niche we're going to look at. Types of resources used and interactions with biotic and abiotic elements. For instance, our friend the squirrel here. He is interacting with a biotic element of the environment by carrying around this acorn. Now, squirrels tend to bury acorns to save for winter. However, they're going to forget about quite a few of them. And when they do, it's going to look like the acorn on the right of your screen. It's starting to sprout and grow a seed. So our squirrel is participating in seed dispersal. That's one of the niches that he's a part of. That's the role in the ecosystem. He helps plant more trees. Another niche that's possible is pest or population control. So we're all very familiar with spiders, and our first instinct is to smush the spider because they're scary and they can bite us, but they play an important role in our ecosystem. They build the webs, they catch the insects, so they control the population of insects so that we are not overrun with insects. Other organisms play population control too, even if an animal is not considered a pest. For instance, our elk over here, our elk is not considered a pest. However, for instance, in Yellowstone National Park, around the park, farmers were having issues with wolves coming in and killing their livestock. So, of course, they were killing the wolves. Well, when they did that, it decreased the wolf population so low that the elk were overpopulating and consuming too much of the vegetation. So they actually had to go and trap wolves and bring them into Yellowstone Park to bring that wolf population back up because they are a very important part of the ecosystem because they control the population of herbivores. Another niche you can look at is the range of tolerance for various physical and chemical conditions. So, when we're thinking of physical and chemical conditions, for instance, one of the physical conditions would be temperature. The organisms you see on the screen live in a particular area where their temperature they're comfortable with is maintained. And that keeps the organism living in their particular niche, their particular area of the habitat. This also works with saltwater organisms. They are tolerant of a certain salinity of water. So for instance, if your typical shark ends up in fresh water, it cannot survive. That's not true of every shark species, but the majority of them have to have that salt water in order to survive. So part of their niche is to live and stay in the area of salt water or water with high salt content. Another niche that an organism can play has to do with the flow of energy and cycling of matter. So, for instance, here we have our plant. Our plant goes through the process of photosynthesis by taking in water and nutrients through its roots. It absorbs oxygen through it absorbs carbon dioxide through the environment, and it gives off oxygen. Well, giving off oxygen as a waste product through photosynthesis is a very important niche that the plant plays because humans and other animals depend on that to live because we breathe in oxygen. And we also play a role in that. Our niche would be to provide the plant with carbon dioxide, which is one of the ingredients that they need to take in during the process of photosynthesis to produce glucose, which is their food. Okay, so we're going to cover some relationships here. You may have heard these last year, but I've noticed that many kiddos are forgetting these words. So we're going to go through these really quickly. Herbivory. It sounds like herbivore. They start with the same prefix there. So a herbivory is just the producer-consumer relationship. The consumer being the caterpillar, the producer being the leaf. The caterpillar consumes the leaf for energy. Predator and prey relationship. Here it's called predation, is another way of saying it. Obviously, our lion is the predator and our zebra is the prey. Now, when you're thinking about predator and prey relationships, they're very interconnected because as one goes up, the other often goes down over time. Notice population density is here, meaning how many of a particular species live in a certain area. And across the bottom, we have time in years. So throughout the years, you can see that it's kind of a roller coaster of up and down of the number of prey and predators. What you need to notice is that as the prey goes down, the prey is in yellow there. After a little while, because there's some space of time here, that's several years there. After a while of having less and less food, our predator population will go down because they do not have enough prey to hunt and get their energy from. But notice, because the predator population has now dropped, now there's fewer predators hunting the prey, so the prey population then begins to rise. And then the cycle starts again because the prey population has risen, has increased so much. The predators now have more food or more sources of energy, so their population will rise after a certain period of time. Now, it takes some time for those predators to hunt and to get energy and food and grow up and reproduce. So there's always going to be a bit of a delay between the increase of prey and the increase of predators. The biggest thing to remember is just to think about how they are dependent. They're interdependent upon each other, and how their population affects the population, like the prey affects the population of the predator, and the predator also affects the population of the prey. Okay. The next relationship we're going to talk about is competition. And that is a relationship because it's the way organisms interact with each other when they're competing for biotic and abiotic resources in their environment. So here to the left, you see the carnivores fighting over some food. And I think that's the typical picture that we think of when we think of competition. What most of my students seem to struggle with is the fact that a plant can actually compete with another plant for resources. They don't do it in the same way, but we have a very exaggerated example here. The flower roots are not nearly as big as the tree roots. So the tree's obviously going to be able to absorb more water than the flower. So they're competing for water in that way. They're also competing for sunlight, which is needed for photosynthesis. Well, with my larger plants or my plants that grow up higher, they're going to be able to access more sunlight than my shorter, smaller plants. And that's something that you'll see discussed a lot in STAR questions, is the fact that your plant is going to want to grow taller or reach up higher in order to get more of that light resource. Okay, our next relationship is mutualism. And there's two smiley faces there because there's two organisms interacting with each other, and they are both happy because they are both benefiting from this relationship. We have a typical relationship here, the bee and the flower. The bee gets nectar, which it can use to make honey, and then our flower is getting pollinated so that it can reproduce and make more flowers. So they both get something out of the relationship. So that's mutualism. When both organisms in the relationship benefit. With commensalism, I have my smiley face and my meh face here, okay? The smiley face is for the owl because he's happy. He found a hole in a tree that he can hide in. He's very well camouflaged with the tree, so he can hide from predators. The tree is the meh face because he's not being harmed and he's not really benefiting from the owl being there. The tree was already there, the hole was already there. The owl coming to live in the tree is not affecting the tree very much. So one organism is benefiting while the other organism is really not affected at all. The next relationship is parasitism. Parasite and host. One you're very familiar with is the mosquito. The mosquito drinks the blood of an animal, including humans, and it's the female mosquito who actually drinks the blood because they need the protein and nutrients in our blood in order to make eggs and reproduce. We don't get anything out of it. Matter of fact, we're harmed. We are left with that itchy bug bite. We can often get diseases from mosquitoes. So that's a parasite. Now, do not get predator and prey confused with parasitism. The big difference is your predator is going to hunt and eat its kill. The parasite is going to latch on and kind of think of about it as stealing nutrients from the host. So if you think of a leech or a mosquito or even mistletoe growing in a tree, um, mistletoe will put its roots into the tree and steal nutrients from the tree. So the host may die over a long period of time due to the parasite, but the parasite isn't actually hunting down and consuming its host. So that's the big difference between parasite and host and predation. Okay, our last topic of discussion in this video is invasive species versus native species. I always like to think of this as an alien invasion. The aliens would be the invasive species. They're, Martians are coming to Earth and they're invading Earth. They are not from Earth. So they're the invasive species. We would be the native species. We are humans. We are from the planet Earth. We are originally come from Earth. So we're the native species. So my example here is the Burmese python that was released in the Florida Everglades. What happened is people had the Burmese python for pets. They're a very pretty snake, but they grow and they get very large and hard to control and care for. So people began to release them in the Florida Everglades. Unfortunately, the Burmese python does not have any predators that are effectively hunting and controlling the population. Where they're from is over in Asia, and tigers and other organisms will actually be able to hunt down the Burmese python and keep their population in check. In Florida, because they don't have enough predators, they are able to grow, they are able to hunt down too many of the prey organisms there so that the other apex predators, for instance, the alligator and the pitcher, have to compete for those energy resources, that food that's available in the Everglades. Okay, you're going to use this information to continue your stations, and I'll actually make a separate video to explain some of the stations because I've had quite a few questions. So in my next video, I'll go over some things that might clarify how to complete your stations.